essentially with amps, like if I had a blackface super reverb, the first thing I would do would get rid of the normal channel. I'd get rid of the vibrato.
Do you want to talk about what that means? Because a lot of people probably would.
Sure, that's
simple.
your expertise. I mean, you've done it all, so that's you. Get right in there.
Well, when people talk about basically, so a Fender amp was meant to be an all-round amp. You know, it had 2 channels, and it had a vibrato, had reverb. It had basically tried to do everything. And the downside of that is things like having 2 channels and having vibrato actually did have a negative effect on the sound at all as well. So if you remove the vibrato, that's almost the main thing. If you remove that, you'll actually get a lot more clarity from your amp and a lot more drive. And the same with removing channel 1. You're basically getting rid of the stuff that you don't want, and in return you just get a clearer an amp with a little bit more drive, a little bit more gain, which is great. Yeah,
I think there are a few of the subscribers I know have super reverb amps, and they've, I've kind of, and this is not to take a pat on the back, but I've kind of guided them to things they could do, because they're halfway across the United States. Here's what I can tell you that would help, and you do a couple of these things, and it kind of gets you in that realm. Those are the quick things. Like if I had to do a show and there was a back line or something, that I would reach behind the amp and do that right away.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Just to help me out. You know what I mean? Because I know what I want. I know at least I can get it kicked up a little more, and I can get that treble to come through a little more, and I can just rely on playing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The amp's not going to start farting out. Usually that's a Fender problem. You know what I mean? They just, when you get the sweet spot by the second set, it's like stepping in a quicksand. You know what I mean? It's just, they got nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So we can talk. We modded a Pro Reverb today with some surprising results and mods you would have never couldn't find anything similar online.
Yeah, I think it's a first what we were doing. It's that real tubey kind of glassiness you often hear with great guitar sounds. I'll just say that. And it's a Fender amp doesn't necessarily do it. It gets pretty close. So the mods we made basically meant that you can get that really glassy, really tubey sound very easily. So fairly simple mod.
Yeah. And it's extremely fat still.
Yeah.
It's not distorted in a way where there's no clarity.
Mm.
It's like a crystalline, clear, fat distortion. That's the best way. I mean, I use the Cougar amps, and I have an amp modified by Cesar Diaz, and both of those amps, though different, they have those qualities.
Yeah.
And to be here today, and to mess with that, I mean, we spent a couple of hours this morning, threw some speakers in it and did some circuitry mods, and they were simple mods. It wasn't like it was anything crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And Riviera era Pro Reverb sounds like a Mount Rushmore now. You know what I mean? It sounds really, really good. That's the fun of it to me. You know what I mean? There's plenty of power in there, and I think, like, again, it relates back to it's not in the gear you buy. It doesn't have to be. It wasn't a Dumble, you know what I mean, that we were modding. It wasn't a Vibreverb. It was just figuring out the circuit, figuring out the mods, and I mean, obviously you know what you're doing in there. Thank God. But it sounded great, and I mean, how much of the amp do you think comes into play when, especially trying to go after his tone?
I think you're really dealing with a fairly heavily overdrived Fender amp.
Right.
So some Fender amps are tuned so even on 10 they're still pretty clean, and
Yeah.
you would need to mod that. So I think the tone is, as long as you can crank the amp and you can get enough brightness
Yeah.
to the amp, then I think a lot of the tone comes from the amp.
Because that's what I think that's the misconception. Like almost, you know, cattailed with Stevie is you hear loud, clean amps, and to a layman or a novice, they may think that the amp has no breakup.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really not the case. It was broken up, but it was the cleanest form of breakup.
Yeah.
It was stinging, clear, and tight. And I think that's the difference. That's where people kind of, they feel like they need to go buy this Dumble copy or this or that. And it you know, all those early bootlegs, and even he was quoted himself saying as his favorite setup was the 2 vibroverbs and the 2 supers. That Dumble was just really used for that chime on top, and it was always set low. If you looked at some of those settings, it was always set super low, mic'd up just for the sparkle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they put that over the house, but he was really banging on those, the blackface Fender amp, or you know, like the Fender style amps.
Yeah.
And you know, it's just a clean distortion. You're not going to turn a super reverb up to the level he was playing at and have that stay clean. There's no way. But it's to say, okay, if you get to, you know, if he was speaking to an amp tech, I would say, in my head, the conversation would have went, I want the amp at this volume. I just want it tighter. You know what I mean? Because then you're allowed to sing a verse, chorus, go into your solo, and you don't have to worry about stepping on something to give you that boost. It's just you dig in harder with your right hand. And that's where the tone, you know, you get that bloom note because you have that big bloom of the amp working for you. You know what I mean? I think that's some of the misconception of it. You know, and you had a lot of that tone. Not to date you here, Jess, but about 20 years ago, you had some of that stuff really nailed. You know, really dialed, and that's how I got into, you know, what you were doing. And I you know, thank God for the internet back then. But some of those older videos when you guys were playing, that tone is really, really there. You know.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, and that really, you know, all the way back then, you know, it was, you know, I did mod my amps a little bit, but like we talked about today, not heavily. Yeah. But basically, it was always, you know, cranked Fender amps.
High-powered speakers.
Sometimes, yeah, I really like. Well, actually, I didn't use EVs back then, so it would have been mostly Fender speakers. And, I think I used some Mackenzies and some different types of speaker. But I was always after trying to find speakers that did that powerful thing. And then, you know, I used Oranges and sometimes Marshalls and things like that. But it was always trying to get a clean amp. So I'd never use a dirty channel on an amp. Right. I never found that worked for me. It was always a clean channel, pretty bright, and then just really crank it until it sort of broke up in a musical way. And I think that's always what I did back then and still do now, really.
Yeah. Especially with the amps too. I mean, I just try to, you know, I get them biased pretty not hot because I don't want any added distortion. I just want the amp to run cool and be dependent. You know, I know we went through that today, but you like it a little warmer.
Well, you know, in my opinion, is when you run an amp cool, it can actually be quite dirty because
right, it can work the other way.
Yeah, but you know, ideally, you want to get it about right. I mean, I think that's my opinion. I mean, I think that there's an interesting thing with tone is that everyone has their way of doing it. If they make it work, then it works. There's no right or wrong way to do it. I think I tend to bias my amps maybe slightly hot, in fact, which would be slightly lower bias on the amp. So the tubes are just working a little bit harder, and it does make it a little bit louder. I like the tone. It's really whatever you like. I think getting tone is very much about listening. It's about listening to what you've got and what parts of what you've got works for you and what parts don't. So even if it's not what, say, Steve Ray Vaughan did, what are you going to do to make it right? Because
I really like that point because you could find a no name tube at a pawn shop or something like that, and you try it, and you say, "Oh my God! Like, listen to what this is doing. This is giving me that crunch at the top end, but it's letting my rhythm come through, you know, or something like that." And that could be, you know, the wow, this is amazing, you know. experimenting as well. You know, trying once you get a good bass tone, it's like, well, let me try a set of power tubes that everybody talks about. Let me try this.
Exactly, because there's loads of great tones out there.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we both love Stevie Ray's tones;
Yeah.
they're amazing. But there's loads of other great tones out there,
Right.
and loads of tones to be discovered. So I think it's important not to get sidetracked by one certain tone because you might miss something amazing, something new, something fresh. So I think it's really good to keep your eyes open for those unique tones that you like. It really is about what you like.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks in a way.